Hello, everyone. I'm Valora Washington, president of the CAYL Institute. We're glad you're here to talk about babies and toddlers with us today. It is really my honor to welcome you to this CAYL Catalyst Webinar Series. We've been having a terrific time having conversations with leaders in the field and practitioners to give straight talk about what's happening in the early childhood education field today. We're the CAYL Institute. We are called Community Advocates for Young Learners. We're a nonprofit organization working to advocate for the workforce in early childhood education and for the rights and needs of all young children. And today, we're really thrilled to be able to bring to you a conversation about our nation's babies and toddlers. Our CAYL webinar series is really designed to bring forth really challenging conversations. It's an invitation for you to think about these issues that are so important in our field. And we issue this challenge and this invitation because it is so important for all of us right now to really have some straight talk and some really transformative talk about what we want to happen with our children and families. So much of the talk these days is really focused on childcare and specifically preschool. But at CAYL, we want to remember the babies and the toddlers. We've long advocated for babies and have written white papers about this topic more than a decade ago. And so we really want to take today a real snapshot to see how our babies and toddlers are doing. How are states and communities working on behalf of our babies and toddlers? So there are a lot of studies that really point to the fact that the state in which babies are born makes a big difference. Yeah, the state where you're born really, really matters for children. It matters for the outcomes of babies. It also matters for the outcomes of their mothers. And we find it very disturbing at CAYL that there are very many inequities that continue to exist. And in every single state of our nation, there are significant disparities that make it more difficult for babies, and especially babies of color, to thrive, even to survive. So let's talk about babies and toddlers today and what we have to do to change the game in ways that are really going to better enable the well-being of our children and our babies and our toddlers. So we want to invite you to this conversation, and we have some wonderful people to guide us and lead this conversation. So we're going to start off by hearing from Patricia Cole, who is the Senior Director of Federal Policy at 0 to 3, a national organization just renowned for keeping on top of what's happening with babies and toddlers. And then we have a number of practitioners who are going to tell us on the ground what's happening with babies and toddlers. So we have Jessica De Jesus Acevedo, who's the owner of Little Stars of Ours Family Childcare Program. We have MaryBeth Bush, who is also the owner and administrator of a family childcare called Mary's Little Lambs Childcare and Preschool. We have Nicole Lazarte, who is actually an infant lead teacher. And we have a member, and she's also a member of the Virginia Promise Partnership Advisory Committee. So we are really excited about what you're going to be able to hear today. We want you to know that this webinar, as all of ours, are only an hour. And so it's a quick conversation. So we really invite you to make sure that you put your questions and chats very visible, because we will be sending everyone a follow-up email that we really try to answer many of your questions. We also want you to know that this whole webinar series is really based on some work that we've done at CAYL called Changing the Game for Generation Alpha. The Alpha generation are all these children that have been born since 2010, a transformative generation that we care a great deal about. So we are really inviting you to think with us about infants and toddlers today, recognizing that every state can do better, recognizing that when we look at the data from the national organization 0 to 3, when they look at health, strong families, and positive early learning outcomes, that we see that states in the Northeast are doing the best in all of these areas, that states in the South are more likely to rank near the bottom in all of these areas, states in the Northeast and West are doing moderately okay in these areas, and states in the West are doing second highest in the area of health, but otherwise ranking similar to states in the Midwest. Let's think about our infants and toddlers and how we can do better. Children of color, once again, faring so much worse, more likely to be born in a low-income family, low birth weight, living in challenging circumstances, high levels of poverty, experiencing some kind of trauma. We can do so much better for our babies. So let's listen to our expert panel talk to us about babies and toddlers. Let's think about what the future for these infants and toddlers can be in terms of their health and learning, their families, and issues of equity. Let's ask ourselves how we can close this gap between the science and the policy, between policy and practice, and definitely the racial gaps and inequities. So we're going to start off by hearing from Patricia Cole, as I mentioned, moving on to MaryBeth Bush, followed by Jessica de Jesus Acevedo, and followed by Nicole Lazarte. So let's jump in right now and hear what we can learn and what we want to discuss about our infants and toddlers. So, Patricia, what can you tell us? What can you share with us?
So excited to join you today and talk about my favorite subject, infants and toddlers, and what they need to thrive. So we know that babies matter in public policy because their rapid brain development is laying the foundation for all learning that follows. And we know that early adversities, as Laura mentioned, literally get under the skin and they change their bodies and brains for a lifetime. And we also know that strong supportive relationships with close caregivers, including their childcare providers, can buffer young children from adversity's effects and promote the positive development that we all want for them. So it stands to reason that if we want to build a strong future for our country, we need policies that ensure our babies and those trusted adults who care for them have what they need to thrive. So my job today is to talk about the story of babies in America and how policies that support their early development may be on the horizon for improving their outlook. So this is supposed to be informal, so I want you to think of this as like one of those icebreakers where you say three things and the others have to guess which one is not true. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is from our State of Babies yearbook that Laura mentioned. And if you haven't seen it, you go to stateofbabies.org, then you read the report, and then you can find your state's profile. The 2021 yearbook is still the story of babies before the pandemic because of the lag in getting national data. But that doesn't mean it was a rosy picture 2 years ago for all of our infants and toddlers. Overall, the story of babies in our country is one of inequities that start even before birth. Children of color and those in families with low income have greater barriers to realizing their potential. About half of babies born in 2019 were children of color. So when you layer on the ever-present and persistent effects of structural racism, that means half of young children and their families in this country are more likely to encounter systemic barriers that thwart their well-being and limit the opportunities to thrive. Outcomes shaped by systemic racism, as well as factors that disproportionately affect the 40% of babies who live in families with low income. That's 2 out of 5 of our babies. And it means that too many young children experience conditions that undermine their development. So let's start with the basics, with economic security, where these two things intersect. Black and American Indian Alaska Native infants and toddlers are close to twice as likely to live in poverty as the national average. Hispanic infants and toddlers are 50% more likely, while white and Asian infants and toddlers are less likely than the national average to live in poverty. And these disparities have real implications for the opportunities that babies have to reach their potential, and that's potential our country desperately needs. Children in families, the disparities for Black infants and toddlers in particular are apparent, and I wanted to mention this because overall we do see differences across states. But when we look at birth outcomes, regardless of the state where they live, Black infants are more likely to be born prematurely or with low birth weight, and infant mortality is twice the national average. And that's true in some of the best states, as well as some of the states where you would think it would be you'd be more likely to see that. Children and families with low income are more likely to experience adversity and material hardship. They're 3 times as likely to live in crowded housing, 3.5 times more likely to have 2 or more adverse experiences before their 3rd birthday, and twice as likely to live in unsafe neighborhoods. And so all of these factors point to the need for strong support for babies' early development. So what kind of access do they have and this to our early care and learning system? Because of cost, where childcare takes a big chunk out of family budgets, we see that we know that childcare is hard to afford for many families. But when we look at those who need help paying for care, which includes moderate income families as well as families with low income, overall, only 4.2% are currently receiving a federal subsidy. And Early Head Start serves only 11% of infants and toddlers in poverty. So I see I'm getting the 2-minute warning, and Ivy, I think you may be shortchanging me. So I'm just going to skip then quickly to what we saw in the pandemic, which was really more intense version of the same. That Black and brown families, regardless of socioeconomic status, are more likely to have faced material hardship during COVID. And this is not surprising based on what we know about babies and families before the pandemic. For childcare, while it may be the moment when the whole country discovered that childcare really actually is kind of essential. The childcare system actually was never on solid ground, became increasingly unstable. So in families with low income, parents' use of childcare it dropped dramatically, and it didn't rebound for the families with low income. But one of the things that's most disturbing is that the Rapid EC project that was where we collected data and used it in the report, and you can read about it, is how we knew what was happening for the infants and toddlers and their families during the pandemic, and it's just an incredible source of information. Since that first period of data collection, they've started collecting data on childcare providers themselves, and it's very disturbing. We already know that 1 in 6 childcare jobs were lost during the pandemic, and programs are still struggling to find staff. But the Rapid EC data reports that childcare providers, the people who hold and care for our babies, are experiencing high levels of material hardship themselves. Many are working multiple jobs to try and make ends meet. And we know stress is a constant in this profession, and the pandemic has clearly worsened it. So while we hope that the American Rescue Plan funds are finally flowing out and stabilizing, we know that it's time to look to the future. The State of Babies report concluded that our nation's lack of strong permanent policies that recognize families' dual roles of participating in the economy and nurturing their children weakened their ability to withstand the additional hardships imposed by the pandemic. And so we concluded that now is a time for national action, for a big, bold baby agenda that will help all of our babies and their families to thrive. So now I'm going to come to the third story, and it requires you to use some visualization skills. Imagine we had a system where funding for childcare tripled in the first year from what it is now, then quadrupled the current amount in the second year, and added 6 times more in the third year, all going to serve more children, raise provider wages, and build the supply and quality. Then in the fourth year, every child under 5 whose family income was less than 2.5 times their state median income was entitled to assistance for paying for care. And many families would pay nothing. No family would pay more than 7% of their income for all their childcare needs. At the same time, reimbursement rates would be based on cost estimates that take into account what quality costs and would be sufficient to pay childcare providers a living wage with parity with elementary teachers with similar credentials and experience. Quality funds would continue to support providers in moving up their state's quality ladder to obtaining professional development and training. So which of these stories isn't true? The fact is they all could be true. The third story is what will happen if the Build Back Better Act that's now before Congress actually passes. Its funding is robust enough to finally build the childcare system everyone needs, families, providers, and our children, for whom childcare is such an immensely important setting in which their early development unfolds. So we're hopeful that this story will come true and not become Yet one more example of wishful thinking that those of us who've worked in childcare for decades and childcare policy for decades, as I have seen over and over. So what can you all do? The most important thing is to let your members of Congress know that young children and families are counting on them to pass the Build Back Better Act. So how can you do this? So I'm going to put in a shameless plug for our Think Babies advocacy effort. If you go to thinkbabies.org, and I can put this in the chat, you can take action directly from there. And while you're at it, you can sign up for the network to stay in touch with what's happening in baby and family policy. So those are my stories. And now I'm going to pass it over to MaryBeth.
Hello, I'm MaryBeth Bush, and I'm a family child care provider, and I have been for 27 years. And I live here in Ohio in a small rural town up in Northeast Ohio. Well, we just heard Patty explain that large sum of money coming from the federal government is earmarked for early childhood, but it's about time. It's actually the first time in my career that this amount of money was ever thought of being used in early care and education. Family child care providers, however, have heard these promises many times before. In the many years I've been a family child care provider, we have been forgotten or not included more times than I can count. Therefore, we feel our voices were just not being heard. And I'll share an example. When the CARES Act money was being allocated in Ohio, there were no family child care providers present at the decision table. At a statewide webinar, the terms of the distribution were shared. And when family child care providers heard we were not being included, we knew we had to do something. See, the state did not recognize us as administrators. The state had us labeled in a mixed message. For our Ohio Jobs and Family Services, we were listed as owners, but in our Ohio Professional Registry, we were listed as administrators. So with the help of our AEYC state affiliate and our state advocacy agency, a letter was drafted and submitted to ODJFS highlighting the fact that family child care providers, we wear many hats, including administrators, owners, lead teachers, nurses, janitors, cooks, and most of all caregivers, and that we should be included in this funding. So after several negotiations, our advocacy finally worked and we were paid a portion of that CARES Act. But what compounds the confusion about our roles as professionals delivering the family child care is that our voices are not heard because we work in such isolation. There are minimum networks across Ohio and the country to represent our unique needs as a small child care program. Most family child care in Ohio and across the country operate with only one person who cares for the children daily. So we cannot close down and travel the distance, like in my case, 3 hours to Columbus, to be at those decision tables. Like many others, if I close down for the day, this means sometimes as many as 10 or more parents cannot go to work that day. This not only causes financial hardship for my business, but it also puts parents in a jam to try to scramble and find adequate substitute care or risk losing their employment. As we know, the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of the weaknesses in the early childhood infrastructure and has highlighted how our child care system is not meeting the needs of working families or educators. The multitude of family child care homes and centers that have closed in the last 18 months is only making this problem worse. A survey from the National Association of the Education of Young Children reported that nearly half of the child care programs closed during the COVID-19 shutdown, and 18% remain closed. If they are reopened, they are usually reopened at a reduced capacity. Nationally, childcare is down an average of 67%. In Ohio alone, 100 childcare centers have closed since 2018. I do not have a final number of how many family childcare programs have closed, but I know the number keeps increasing. As I mentioned, the pandemic has caused an already fragile system of delivery to lose what stability it did have. There are several key components of that system that has led to this instability. First, there is a big discrepancy between how childcare centers and family childcares are reimbursed for caring for the same age group of children. For example, in Ohio, a childcare center receives $260 and the family childcare provider only receives $165 for the same age infant based on a 1-star rating in our quality and improvement system. That is over a $90 difference per infant per week. Over a year's time, that is a big significant difference. Another example of this disparity is that the Department of Education early childhood programs are paid on enrollment, where childcare programs, including family childcare, are paid only on attendance. Therefore, if a child does not attend the program, the childcare program does not get paid, except for a few absent days that are allotted per year. Whereas the Department of Education programs receive payment based on enrollment. So they continue to receive payment regardless if enrollment goes down. Although I did not close my program down all the way, I am one of the statistics from the pandemic. I had to cut my hours down to only 4 hours a week and 1 weekend a month so that I could take on a full-time job. I needed benefits and I needed to make a worthy wage. My new role allows me to stay close to my passion. I work for our local resource and referral agency where I am able to mentor, coach, offer assistance with licensing issues, and present professional developments based on the needs of family childcare providers. I am still a strong advocate of family childcare. It broke my heart when I had to reduce my hours because I know families with infants and toddlers choose family childcare for the intimacy, the responsive care, and the lower ratios they receive in these quality homes. Now, because of the lack of childcare, families have to make the ultimate choice of either to drop out of the workforce or entrust their precious babies to friends or families that are not regulated or educated in early childhood development. As someone I really admire, expert Alice Honig shares, infants and toddlers need attachment for healthy development. They need individual experiences and interactions with special adults. These experiences shape the child's personality. This attachment with a consistent, caring adult must be a priority and a concern for all those caring for young children. Intimate attachments to those others are a hub around which a person's life resolves, not only as an infant and toddler, but throughout adolescence and the years of maturity and into old age. There is a glimmer of hope, though. In an article released on October 28, 2021, Lynette Dumas, the Executive Director of the National Family Child Care Association, shared, "The framework for the Build Back Better Act is significant for the future of childcare. For too long, family childcare programs have been left on the outside, and today the administration opened the door and welcomed us in. This is a watershed moment for family childcare providers, an acknowledgement of our contributions to serving our communities, supporting the economy, and shaping the lives of the youngest Americans. This investment announced by the administration," whoops, oh, lost my place, "are important for everyone that interacts with our childcare system, young children, parents, and early childhood educators, and allow us to provide high quality care for years to come. Let us remember that we care for America's precious infants and toddlers, and we need to take some serious steps to improve our future generations. I am optimistic about this new funding coming in. My hope is that we will be able to stabilize early childhood education and lift up and grow family childcare. Thank you. Now we will hear from Jessica."
Great Thursday. My name is Jessica Acevedo. I am the proud owner of Little Star of Ours Daycare in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I actually attended a family daycare growing up, which makes this work full circle. I am now a second-year PhD student at UMass Boston, focused on early education and care research and policy. Thank you, each of you, for what you do for the workforce, and to Clarence Little for your influence and support. Thank you to the CAYL Institute for the rigorous work your team is doing. I'd like to explain why I became an advocate for early education and care. I started publicly advocating in 2020 when my program was closed for 172 days. We lost $50,000, over $50,000 in business revenue, which forced our employees to be placed on unemployment and made us unable to pay daycare rent. The fear and uncertainty of those challenges during quarantine are still existent and linger today. I, however, had the privilege to be Congresswoman Catherine Clark's virtual assistant for Biden's address. Biden's address was significant for our workforce due to the $1.5 trillion for the American Families Plan, which included $225 billion specifically for affordable childcare. To build back an equitable early education and care workforce, I suggest we find our influence, our power, and our voices. As a workforce, it's time to advocate for ourselves. Public advocacy will help our parents, stakeholders, and policymakers make more informed decisions better understand what we need and how they can help us. Advocacy is the tool to empower our professional rights and responsibilities to young children, families, and most importantly, each other, Black, brown, or white. My ask of us as a women-led workforce is that we influence change through the use of our powerful voices to positively develop business management and support private early education programs, business management and infrastructure for family child care programs is essential. I suggest using written, defined business plans to support our entrepreneurs create strategic plans and hire accountants or CPAs to monitor business profits, losses, or implement technology, as well as utilize our licensing agencies, local banks, school districts, small businesses, and other providers in the field. Due to the mismanagement of childcare programs, childcare programs will continue to close. These areas include, but are not limited to, insufficient funds, poor team and money management, overexpansion, teacher shortage, family changes, and cash flow problems. Private family childcare programs that are private must be profitable. The Boston Opportunity Agenda reported in July of 2021 that between 2017 and 2021, that there was a 21% decrease of center-based and family childcare programs. The availability for children between the ages of 0 and 5 also decreased 11.3% as well in March of 2021. Boston alone lost 13% of early education and care programs, which equates to 68 family child care programs and 9 center-based programs, and hundreds of children and families without care. And please remember, this data is from the summer. It's not up to date. To change the workforce requires truth, effective communication, and transparency in the field. We must create holistic policies that focus not only on our young children, but on our teachers and staff's safety, health, and happiness. Create a more supportive workforce of solid women leaders through free education and hands-on training with a redefined supportive culture of continuous development. We must be able to effectively communicate with each other to connect our common goals to improve the early education and care workforce. Create new policies that not just ensure equality, but also equity, that early education and care programs have the equal opportunity to operate today and in the future. I challenge you all to advocate today because you are the voices we need. We are destined to create change in policy, not just in the workforce, but in our country. Your titles include, but are not limited to, educators, parents, friends, mentors, entrepreneurs, researchers, and advocates now. I'd like to wrap up with a quote by Marianne Williamson. What is your deepest fear? Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is your light, not your darkness, that most frightens us. You playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so people don't feel insecure about you. We're all meant to shine as a child, though it's not some of us, it's in everyone. As we let our light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. End of quote. You are an early education and care change maker. I believe in us. Please put in the chat how many years you have been working or advocating early education. Happy November all. Thank you. Nicole, can you take over?
Hello, everybody. My name is Nicole Lazarte, and I am an educator. I'm a lead infant teacher at a child development center, as well as also being the advocacy committee chair for Northern Virginia Association for the Education of Young Children. So I'm a current educator right now in the midst of the pandemic. I've had the fortunate luck to be able to have worked throughout the entire pandemic. And what I've learned quickly with my experience as an educator is that not all babies have the same opportunity to thrive. We all know that one of the basic principles of constructing a strong house is building a strong foundation with babies, and building the architecture of the brain works the same way. The foundation created in their first years must be strong in order for the child to thrive over time. What we do know is that of infants and toddlers under age of 3, 48% live in low-income families and 25% live in poor families. Families with infant and toddlers have complex needs. Some have unmet physical needs and mental health needs, while others struggle just to provide the basics, whether it be food or shelter, or just even diapers. To ensure that our babies have a healthy start in life, families must be able to provide nurturing relationships, a safe home environment, nutritional foods, a high quality childcare and healthcare. And this is a time when policymakers should increase their focus on very young children and understand the importance of programs that ensure their material needs are met. We can recommend to policymakers to help families build a foundation that meets their young children's basic needs by increasing food, housing, energy assistance, implementing welfare to work policies that consider the needs of young children, and targeting tax credits for low-income families. One of the most consistent associations in the science of early childhood is between economic hardship and compromised child development. As a current educator in the field in the midst of the pandemic, one of my personal concerns right now is the disparity growing, especially in the social emotional aspect. As my colleagues before me mentioned, the pandemic affects many aspects of life in the field, in the family home, and honestly, every single way. The rapid brain development of infants and toddlers makes them especially vulnerable to the effects of stress. Social emotional development describes a young child's ability to experience, express, and regulate emotions, form close, secure interpersonal relationships, and explore their environment and learn within the context of a family and cultural expectations. The milestones underpin each child's overall development and greatly influences their lifelong trajectory. Children's mental health can be affected by exposure to adversity and even just being exposed to the pandemic and all the stress that comes with it, and can also cause mental health issues in our youngest children. Where I work, I found that I can only do so much within my four walls. As a teacher, I've always known that I wanted to be in this field, and I knew that I wanted to help those who needed the most, whether it be a Title I school or a family or in a child daycare where most families are using subsidy. And so what I found as an educator, and what I'm realizing is what most teachers get burnout from, is figuring out what more can I do and where does that line end. And so as a teacher that works in an area where most of my students do receive subsidy, I find myself, I can only do so much within my four walls. I can teach them to crawl, I can take care of them from 7 to 5, but what about afterward? What about for those parents that are working double jobs, for the parents that I've asked them 3 times for diapers? And it's not that they don't want to breathe them in, it's just that they can't. How can we help those families? And so for me personally, the reason that I became an advocate was to be able to help all my families, help all my children and figure out, sometimes we think just because they're babies, they don't realize what's going on around them. And that, when you work with children, and you guys know this, is that kids realize everything and they absorb everything. And whether or not they express outwards what is happening to them, they are taking in and they're developing with those experiences and rooted into their self. And so we are working right now, especially with the policy makers, is to be able to bring that mental health aspect into children and being able to, build their foundation from the strongest that we can so that they can reach their full potential. We are currently reading this from 0 to 3. Thank you, Patricia. Now, by age 2, children in the lowest social economic group are behind their peers in measures of cognitive, language, social emotion development, and a 6-month gap in language skills undermines all other learning. That personally to me is just not right. And so we have to speak as advocates, we have to speak up. We are teachers, we are educators, we are people of the field who know exactly what's going on. The earliest years of a child's life are a crucial time for learning, and right now is a crucial time for us to advocate for the future of our children, families, and economy. We need you, educators, partners, parents, and allies, to raise a powerful collective voice to demand that our nation's policies catch up with the science about the importance of brain development and the benefits of investing in high quality early learning built with educators who are skilled, supported, and compensated for the complex and demanding jobs that they perform. Political will for early childhood investment is growing across the nation, but it needs our voices together right now to create a movement. So I would like everybody after this call, to look up who are your legislators, connect with them at all levels, find the policy agenda. You can find that from Google. You can find that from your local NVAEYC affiliate. That's just my plug as well for the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And invite your local elected officials to visit high quality centers. Speak up, send them messages, send them calls. follow them on Twitter, follow them on Facebook, and just try to get to know what their agendas are so that you can make sure as an educator that fits you as a professional and also the children in your care. So this is just my open invitation to everybody. Be an advocate. Don't let those frustrations and that wall, lead to teacher burnout. Instead of figuring out like, oh, there's not more I can do, so let's go do something. Let's go speak up. Let's go find the opportunity to let these policymakers know, us as educators who are professionals, this is what we need and this is what our children need. So thank you. Let's bring everybody back for a group discussion.
Wow, I am so inspired by all of you. I mean, Patricia doing so much of the advocacy work in Washington, D.C. And what we've just seen is 3 very powerful practitioners, people who are working with babies and toddlers every day, right now, who have really understood the importance of finding their policy voice. And that's what I want to start with. I mean, this real understanding that, Nicole, you're still in the classroom. MaryBeth, you're still running family child care. Jessica, you're still running a center, and how each and every one of you working with babies and toddlers have realized that you've got to stand up and make a difference and tell your stories. How did you start to begin to get involved from the classroom to this policy platform and really understanding and looking at the big picture? Any of you want to share? How did you first get involved?
I can start off. So for me, like I said, I was in a classroom where I work with a lot of families that are low income and need a lot of needs. And so I started, like I said earlier, Googling, what are different resources that I can get to these families. So it started off with 0 to 3. It started off with Voices for Virginia's Children and kind of reaching out and getting on those newsletters. And then little by little on one of those newsletters was, do you want to join an advocacy cohort? And I said, yes, I do. Teach me the ways. And with that cohort, I was able to learn what opportunities, how to speak to legislators, and going on to even make my own cohort to make more advocates. Like I said, if you have a spot on the table, it is your responsibility to make another spot for another advocate.
Yeah, we've got to make sure that there are people there, Patricia, who really can speak from their experience of working with infants and toddlers. We strongly advocate preschool and kindergarten and up through 3rd grade, but the infant toddler voice, Patricia, has been so absent. So aren't you inspired by hearing these 3 stories?
Oh my goodness, I can't even tell you. I'm sitting here going, hey, we need those voices and we need them in Washington. And I think one of the things that we've learned over the last few years that it is bringing the voices of providers and parents. And sometimes before the pandemic, 0 to 3 brought babies to Capitol Hill to tell them that you need to pay attention to this time of life. And I just have to say that we want people to understand that the child care portion of this Build Back Better Act, and there's also a pre-K portion, but we want them to understand that the child care portion is for the babies, and it's our shot to give babies the quality care and to support the providers that, like you've heard today, and that are all in the chat on how long they've been in the child care profession. And this is our shot to do what we need to do for babies. So thanks to all of you for advocating. And you see that, how engaging it is once you get started. So everybody's
absolutely. And what really amazes me and what CAYL stands for is people understanding the importance of us being an organized community, because it's just not enough for Nicole to sit in her classroom with those babies and say, ain't it awful? Okay. She already tried that. It doesn't work. You've got to get organized with other people. We know that 0 to 3 is one way you can be organized. The event you're talking about, Patricia, your Strolling Thunder, where you take babies, to legislation. All of the rest of you have talked about how strong the National Association for the Education of Young Children affiliate have been in helping you to understand and find your voice. So this organizing component is really critical. MaryBeth, we're all wanting to be extremely hopeful right now because of the Build Back Better and the things that it promises. But I want to say, as people are putting in the chat how many years they've worked in the field, I've worked in this field 45 years, Patricia, and it's accurate to say we've been here before, right? And things did not materialize the way that we had hoped. We are optimistic. MaryBeth, you gave some compelling examples of how family childcare has been left out despite promising things that have happened in the past. What makes you optimistic now that it's going to be different?
Well, my biggest optimistic is now that and the National Family Child Care Association has a seat at the table in the national. I don't think before they had somebody actually sitting right in Congress, and I know that they're fighting. I've been to their conferences, and I know that they are, you know, like you said, we need that group where, you know, I was just one provider from Ohio, but as I joined these groups and the national groups, you know, we have to do it in numbers. So.
Absolutely. And the National Association of Family Child Care is certainly turning up in some new and exciting ways that we're very happy to hear. Jessica, you've really told a heartbreaking story of being closed for so many days and the impact that had on you financially, but also on your colleagues. You know, we have survived, many of us. Many of our programs have not survived. What we need to do is move from this survival moment to a sustainability moment. We've got to be sustained, and we've got to be sustained at a higher level than it was before. Going back to the way things used to be isn't good enough. Jessica, what gives you hope right now?
Thank you so much for the question. I am hopeful of conversations just like this one that I get to be a part of, and not just share my story, but hear how that my story is not singular based on my zip code or my demographic, that there are providers and early educators state to state dealing with the same common issues. And I believe MaryBeth just mentioned, it's really numbers and coming together with powerful women and powerful women that have voices and have the abilities to connect with policymakers and to share their stories and highlight that. There also has been such a continuous conversation of the need of childcare. It's an everyday, every news spotlight. So, you know, the conversation has been highlighted in a way and a focus infrastructure-wise that we've never seen. So it's really time for us to unionize the mission and visions that we see for the early education and care, not just now, but moving 45 years to make sure that, you know, we're not having the same conversations. And that's, to answer the question that you asked before, that's what encourages me to advocate, is that we're still seeing the same issues that we saw 50 years ago, and it's unacceptable.
Absolutely unacceptable. You know, one of the things that I keep saying, Jessica, that we at CAYL are saying, we need to turn this moment into a movement. And the way we become a movement from this moment is the organizing that you're doing, the speaking out, having the voices of people who are working with infants and toddlers very specifically to share. Nicole, you talked about mental health and social emotional. I just have to bring that up right now because I think this is a really, you know, something that we should all be concerned about, the social emotional development of all of our young children, and particularly infants and toddlers. What are you seeing as you're working with children, babies and toddlers every day on this front?
Yeah, so that's something my coworkers and I speak every single day on, is that you can see the difference between what it's been during the pandemic and what you've seen before. You know, children are more high stress. The fact that we have masks and aren't able to communicate our expressions is already the biggest tool, and that's just the smallest one. You know, babies and toddlers, they're learning expressions, they're learning how to regulate their emotions by seeing us, by reading our mouths. So we're seeing that language development delays. We're seeing, you know, when I'm saying, no, you cannot do that, Sophia, they don't know what I'm saying. They can't read my expressions. So sometimes I even have to, you know, lower it just so they can see my eyes a little more. And it's so interesting to see that they, you know, can't read expressions anymore. Another thing is high stress. Parents are so stressed right now, whether it be financial, work, or just making it day to day. And the babies are absorbing that, you know, whether it be when they're sleeping. Now I'm seeing them when they're sleeping, like they're almost crying. And, you know, you see things that are off. And when I speak to parents at the end of the day and I go, hey, you know, Joseph today was a little off. And the fact will be, you'll see the parent, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's because yesterday, da, 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 da. And so for us as educators, I almost say it is our job just to keep our children safe and feeling safe in our day-to-day basis, and then hoping that transfers over home as parents try to maneuver their way through the pandemic. It's been rough.
Security and safety is just so basic. MaryBeth, do you have anything to add? I know you have a bigger role now that you're playing in your community. What are you seeing in the social, emotional, mental health area?
Well, I see it more in the, the providers, the technician, the practitioners. And yeah, and they're just scared, they call me all the time and say, what can I do? And so we try different strategies, but it's still, even just what can they do with the kids, and the families, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, what are practitioners saying to you?
A lot of them are just ready to close. And I try, well, then I explain like, well, where are the parents going to go? They need you. And I just help them come up with some different strategies, but it's not been easy. Trying to keep the parents engaged. That's our biggest one. We used to have the parents come in to the programs and meet other parents. And so we're trying to do a lot virtually. And we've set up a lot of different ways that they can keep those parents engaged at home and send things home. And, different things like that is what comes to my mind.
At the national level, Patricia, what are you hearing at 0 to 3?
Well, this is the part of my talk I jumped over when I thought I was running out of time. So one of the things that we saw in the Rapid EC survey, and one of the things we actually predicted, what's going to happen when you have parents whose economic security is jeopardized because they've lost their jobs or they've lost their childcare and they're at home and they're isolated and they have small children, and the stress level is going to go up. And that's in fact what the Rapid EC survey showed. And it showed that as a family's material hardship and economic hardship was at a higher level, their distress levels of both the parents and children tracked right up with it. So that we knew there was a lot of stress. We did a lot of work advocating for funding to go out, not just for childcare, although we certainly advocated for that, but also for things like family resource and support centers or home visiting to reach out to families and really support that. And the last thing, they just actually put out a blog today that said that parents' distress levels had been going down, but now they're shooting back up because they're worried about the virus, and they're really worried also that their childcare is going to close when they have it. It's going to close because of COVID, and so there's stress levels. And so I knew that Nicole had mentioned that she was going to talk about that, and it's just everything just tracks like this is child development, and it's not like pony tricks. We know what happens to children when they don't feel secure. So I think that trying to extend those resources, we were able to put out give some language to the department when they put out the guidance for the American Rescue Plan money to use it for mental health consultation to support both staff and children, and really get those resources and understand that when those children's their social emotional development is undermined, that means that they're not don't have the energy and the focus for their cognitive abilities to grow. So it all is intertwined for young babies.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Jessica, I see you nodding your head vigorously. What do you want to add to the conversation?
So I wanted to kind of go back to what you were talking about in regards to sustainability, because I feel like as a program owner, I do feel still uncertain of, if we'll open, next month, or something will happen, or, if somebody will get sick. So the uncertainty is definitely there. But in regards to parents, what we've been working on is making sure that we're communicating that if they need anything from us, that we're here for them. As a private program, we don't have vouchers and we don't affiliate with programs. So we're directly working with families who at any time can face unemployment or have changes in the family household. So it's really a part of our job now to make sure that we are safeguarding our families and being able to talk about money and payment options, and not just pushing children or families out because of money, because that's what we're seeing as a community of private programs, is that we're having to close because of lack of money. But if we're able to work together and use the parent voices to say, hey, here, this is where the extra $50 was lacking from, because this second parent lost their wages for the year. You know, and it's really more about open communication of where our families are, where we are as people, and, you know, just engaging in a safe way and making that that a part of our mission also. Like, we need to get parents and families back on board and make them feel safe in our learning spaces.
Yeah, and this is why I am just so proud to be in the field of early childhood education. It's because of Nicole and Jessica, MaryBeth, and all of the people, the educators, the providers who are out there. The love, there's no other word but love, that we have shown for our children and our families during this extremely difficult time, doing things that we wouldn't have done. And I think that that is truly a strength that we have, and also a strength that families trust us and they believe in us and they come to us. And that is a huge strength. It may be considered a soft skill, but it is something that is so highly valued. You can't put a price on that, the trust that we have earned over decades of working in communities. I know just keeping children basically supplied. You know, I have a colleague, Kit Cox, who for decades has really worked on having diapers for babies. This has been a huge problem for a long time. Now it has become a tragedy, just having basic diapers for people. Nicole talked about that in her talk. And so, you know, from basic needs like diapers to other more invisible needs like the social emotional development, to things you can see like the language development of our infants and toddlers. These are challenges that we are facing. COVID is not over. We're not out of the woods yet. And so I would like to close this session by just asking each of you about what gives you hope. We heard the quote that Jessica gave us about our greatest fear of being authentic or of being powerful. What is our greatest hope right now? What is our greatest thing that we're holding on to as we're trying to move forward, as we're trying to turn this moment into a movement? Let's start with you, Patricia. You're on Capitol Hill all the time. What is giving you hope and inspiring you right now?
I just have to say, just being on this webinar has been amazing, and just hearing all the stories and knowing that we know there are thousands of really dedicated
Yes.
childcare professionals out there, but to hear them speak in person, it's just pretty amazing. And so it makes me want to really work harder, and that gives me hope. There's too much strength in this community. And you know, so Congress willing, hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have the sustainability that everyone that is listening to this and is out there, and all of their colleagues really deserve, and our families and children deserve as well.
Thank you so much. Anybody want to go next? Tell me what's inspiring you, what's giving you hope right now?
Go next. I love the moment to movement, because that's exactly how I feel in regards to the highlighting I've had in regards to our program and family child care. But also what's giving me hope is the funding behind it. Like, there is hope when there is money and dollars behind the work that we're doing finally. And the people saying, you know, giving value, not just financially, but highlighting the type of work that we do and highlighting the need to make that more efficient and broaden the work. So there's just so many positive outlooks in regards to the future of early education right now. And I want us to forget the stress and the crying and the poop and all those things and really manifest all of the great things, because those young children are going to be sitting in our seats one day or be the next president. So I'm so hopeful for the future.
Thank you. Go ahead, MaryBeth.
Okay, yeah, I was going to kind of say the same thing. Just, you know, just hearing childcare in the news all the time now, and they're finally getting it right. They're not calling it, you know, they're calling it childcare, and you know, that was a big struggle too. You know, they just kind of passed over a lot of it, but it's just in the news, and I think just being that highlighted it is making everybody more aware. And unfortunately, how it came to be, we have to forget that and go forward. Like Jessica said, it's, you know, we have to put the past behind us and just, I think we're on an uphill. So I'm looking forward to the future as well.
Absolutely. And Nicole, you'll have the final word.
Well, I saw somebody in the chat put hope equals babies, and I completely agree. I think that we, you know, when a baby takes its first steps and he stumbles, we go, oh, it's okay, you put him right back up and he keeps walking. And I think we have to keep that same kind of momentum us as advocates and even as educators and say, all right, that bill didn't go through, but we're going to get it back up and we're going to keep trying. So, you know, taking my inspiration from my littlest ones.
What a terrific analogy. Thank you all so much. I want to tell you and everyone who's doing the great work like you're doing in the field with the children, we so much respect you. You have so much value that you're bringing to this field, to this work, to our nation. Thank you so much. We are so grateful to everything that you're doing every single day. And to those of you on this webinar, thank you very much for that. So as we close out this webinar right now, I think there are a number of things that we might be thinking about. We've got to change the game for infants and toddlers. The policy priorities that we've just heard about from Patricia, the need for family support, the way we heard from Jessica, the need for racial justice, the way we need to support practitioners, the way MaryBeth was talking about. These are ways that we can change the game for infants and toddlers. And this is what we absolutely must do. And we're, for those of you who are familiar with our work on how we might change the game for Generation Alpha, as a result of being on this webinar, if you are interested in this book, you can get it with a promo code VALORA to get 15% off the book. We want to invite all of you to join us in a conversation. If you want to talk to these panelists that we just heard from, there's a link that's being placed in the chat box that you can press, and it's going to take us to a spot where you can interact with the panelists yourself to ask your questions or to help us move forward. So look in the chat box, click the link, and we really want to hear from you. I really want to thank you so much for learning with CAYL today. I'm inspired. It's so amazing for me to hear from everybody. Truly appreciate everything that people are bringing forward. If you're out there listening, we hope that this has inspired you and encouraged you to get engaged with the community, to do the activist work that we must do. Thank you so much for being part of the CAYL Catalyst Webinar Series. I hope to see you as we have the chat with our panelists right now as we move to that. Thank you and good night.